The plasma bolt missed Commander Jake Harrison by inches, scorching the metal wall behind him. He rolled behind a cargo container as 3 more shots hammered his position. His wife, Queen Vexara of the Kethrian Empire, stood 20 meters away in the command center, her 4 eyes wide with shock as armed rebels stormed through the breached hull of her flagship. Jake had exactly 3 seconds before the next wave reached her position. The rebels wore stolen military armor and carried weapons that could punch through Kethrian shields. They had planned this assault perfectly, timing it during the diplomatic summit when security protocols were relaxed. Vexara's royal guards lay scattered across the deck, their bodies still smoking from energy weapons. She raised her hand, preparing to unleash her telekinetic abilities, but Jake saw what she couldn't. The sniper, positioned in the upper gantry, had her in his sights, waiting for the exact moment her concentration peaked and her personal shield flickered. Jake moved. He launched himself from cover, not towards safety but directly into the crossfire. His combat vest, a gift from his Marine Corps days that Vexara had always teased him about wearing, suddenly made sense. He never told her what modifications Earth's military had installed before he left for the outer colonies. Never explained why he insisted on keeping it despite her offers of superior alien technology. The first rebel fired center mass. Jake's vest absorbed the impact, distributing the energy across its surface. The second rebel adjusted his aim for a headshot. Jake was already sliding beneath the trajectory, his hand finding the pistol at his hip. 2 shots, 2 bodies dropping. His accuracy hadn't diminished, despite 3 years of peaceful married life on Vexara's homeworld. The sniper fired. Jake was there first, his body between the beam and his wife. The shot struck his shoulder, spinning him halfway around. Pain exploded through his nerve endings, but he kept moving. His left arm hung useless, but his right hand still worked. That was enough. Vexara screamed his name, her voice raw with terror. She had never seen him like this. Their entire relationship had been built during peacetime, after Earth's integration into the galactic community. She knew he was former military, but he had always been gentle with her, patient, kind. She had no idea what humans were capable of when pushed. Jake reached the command console and slammed his palm against the emergency lock. Blast doors began descending throughout the ship, sectioning off the rebels. But they were already too close. 5 of them converged on the command center, weapons raised. He grabbed a piece of broken bulkhead, the jagged metal edge gleaming under the emergency lights. His drill instructor's voice echoed in his memory. When you run out of bullets, you use whatever's in reach. When that runs out, you use your hands. When those fail, you use your teeth. A Marine never stops fighting. The rebels hesitated, seeing a wounded human with an improvised weapon facing them. It was the last mistake they ever made. Jake moved through them like a storm, his injured shoulder forgotten, his body operating on muscle memory and adrenaline. The metal shard found throats and joints, the weak points in their armor that any soldier worth his salt could identify. Vexara watched her husband transform into something she had only read about in Earth's historical records. The documents called it combat effectiveness. The unofficial term was more accurate. Humans went berserk. When the last rebel fell, Jake dropped the bloody metal and turned to face his wife. His shoulder was ruined, his vest was melted in 3 places, and his hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. But his eyes were clear and focused on her. She stood frozen, her royal composure shattered. In 3 years of marriage, she had never truly understood what it meant that Earth had fought its way to the stars through centuries of warfare. That humanity had forged itself in fire long before meeting peaceful species like hers. Jake took a step toward her and collapsed. Vexara caught him, her forearms cradling his body as alarms screamed throughout the ship. She looked at his face, at the man she thought she knew, and realized their story was just beginning. The rebellion had made a critical error. They had threatened a human's family. Now they would learn why Earth's integration into galactic society came with warnings. The royal flagship's engines roared to life as reinforcements arrived, but Vexara barely noticed. She held Jake close, feeling his heartbeat strong against her chest, and understood something fundamental had changed between them. He had shown her a side of humanity that the diplomatic corps worked hard to keep hidden. Her human spouse had unleashed his true power, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The medical bay's sterile lights hurt Jake's eyes when he finally opened them. His shoulder was encased in Kethrian regenerative gel, the advanced technology already knitting torn muscle and shattered bone. 3 days had passed since the attack, though he had no memory of most of it. The drugs they used for pain management on this side of the galaxy made morphine look like aspirin. Vexara sat beside his bed, her posture rigid in the formal robes of her office. She hadn't worn those around him since their wedding night. The shift back to official regalia told him everything about her mental state. She was retreating into the safety of protocol because she didn't know how to process what she had witnessed. He tried to sit up, and she was instantly there, her hands gentle but firm as she eased him back down. Her touch was familiar, but her expression remained guarded. The warmth he was used to seeing in her multifaceted eyes had been replaced by something more complex, respect mixed with caution, perhaps, or fear. Jake spoke first, his voice rough from disuse. He asked about casualties, about the status of the rebel threat, about her council's response, professional questions that gave them both room to breathe. She answered in kind, explaining that his actions had bought enough time for her personal fleet to arrive. The rebels had been captured or killed. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone suspected, reaching into the noble houses themselves. But then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind for 3 days. She wanted to know why he had never told her. Why he had hidden this capability, this capacity for violence. Her people were not warriors. The Kethrian Empire had been built on trade and diplomacy, protected by technology and treaties. They had combat specialists, yes, but nothing like what she had witnessed. Jake chose his words carefully, explaining that Earth's history was complicated. Humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other before they finally looked up at the stars. Every human carried that legacy in their DNA, a heritage of survival through conflict that peaceful species couldn't fully comprehend. He told her that he hadn't hidden it to deceive her, but because it wasn't something he wanted to define their relationship. He had left that life behind, or so he thought. He had found peace in her arms, in her world, in a future where his military skills were obsolete. But some training never faded. When someone threatened his family, 20 years of conditioning had taken over before his conscious mind could even process the threat. Vexara processed this silently, her fingers tracing patterns on the medical bed's frame. She admitted that the Kethrian Intelligence Service had provided her with Earth's military records before their marriage. She had read the files, seen the numbers from human conflicts, understood intellectually what her species was allying with. But reading statistics and watching her husband move through armed soldiers like they were paper targets were entirely different experiences. She confessed that she was frightened not of him specifically, but of what it meant. If one human could do what he did while injured and unprepared, what could Earth's military accomplish if provoked? Her empire had treaties with humanity, yes, but those treaties assumed mutual respect and peaceful intentions. What she had seen suggested that peace was a choice humans made, not a limitation of their nature. Jake reached for her hand with his good arm and she let him take it. He acknowledged her fear was reasonable, but reminded her that the capacity for violence and the desire to use it were separate things. Humans had learned painfully and over centuries that strength without restraint led to extinction. Earth's greatest warriors were often its strongest advocates for peace because they understood the true cost of war. He had married her because he loved her, because she represented everything he wanted his future to be. Gentle, wise, committed to building rather than destroying. He would never use his training against her or her people, but he would also never apologize for using it to protect her. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of High Chancellor Zorith, Vexara's chief military advisor. The elderly Kethrian entered with obvious discomfort, his posture indicating deep respect bordering on submission. This was unusual. Zorath was known for his pride and had initially opposed the Queen's marriage to an outsider. The Chancellor got straight to business. The security footage from the attack had been analyzed extensively. Military experts from 6 different species had reviewed Jake's performance. The consensus was disturbing for anyone who valued galactic stability. Jake had been operating at approximately 40% effectiveness due to his injury and lack of proper equipment. Even compromised, he had neutralized 13 armed combatants in under 2 minutes. Zorith explained that military analysts were now reassessing Earth's threat level. The planet had been classified as a moderate military power, dangerous in defense, but unlikely to project force aggressively. That assessment was being revised. If human civilians could fight like Jake, what could their actual soldiers do? Jake interrupted, pointing out that he wasn't exactly a civilian. He was a former Marine Force reconnaissance operator, part of an elite unit that represented maybe 1% of 1% of Earth's military. Using him as a baseline for human capability would be like judging all Kethrians by their Royal Guard's abilities. But Zorith countered with data. Earth's military had millions of soldiers with combat experience. Their training programs were intense by galactic standards, pushing recruits to physical and mental limits that most species considered abusive. Humans routinely operated in environmental conditions that would kill other species. Their tolerance for pain, their endurance, their adaptability in crisis situations, all of it pointed to a species that had evolved for warfare. The Chancellor posed a direct question. If humanity decided to expand aggressively, could anyone stop them? The Kethrian Empire had superior technology. Yes, but humans had already demonstrated remarkable ability to adapt and improve alien tech. Give them another generation, and that advantage might disappear. Vexara cut through the tension with royal authority. She pointed out that this entire conversation was pointless. Humanity had chosen peace. Earth's government had spent decades proving its commitment to galactic cooperation. Judging an entire species by their capacity for violence rather than their choices was exactly the kind of prejudice that had caused conflicts throughout history. She stood, her forearms spread in a gesture of finality. She declared that Jake had saved her life and protected the Empire. Instead of questioning humanity's intentions, perhaps they should be grateful that Earth's warriors were on their side. The security failures that allowed the attack were Kethrian, not human. They should focus on fixing their own weaknesses rather than fearing their allies. Zoreth bowed and withdrew, but the damage was done. The conversation had revealed a fundamental shift in how the Kethrian leadership viewed humanity. Fear and respect were now intertwined in ways that would reshape diplomatic relations. After the Chancellor left, Vexara returned to Jake's side. She admitted that Zorith's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. The power imbalance between species was real, and humanity's potential for violence was now undeniable. But she also knew that strength without wisdom was worthless, and humans had demonstrated both. She made a request. She wanted to understand Earth better, to see the world that had shaped him. She wanted to visit the planet she had only seen in diplomatic briefings, to walk among humans in their natural environment. If she was going to lead her people in alliance with Earth, she needed to truly understand what that alliance meant. Jake agreed, warning her that Earth wasn't like her homeworld. It was rough around the edges, still healing from centuries of conflict and environmental damage. But it was also beautiful in ways that peaceful worlds could never be. It was real in a way that sanitized diplomatic presentations could never capture. They talked through the night as his body healed, rebuilding the intimacy that violence had complicated. She asked about his past, about missions he had never discussed, about the cost of the life he had lived before meeting her. He answered honestly, holding nothing back. The time for comfortable illusions had passed. By morning, they had reached a new understanding. Their marriage had been tested by fire and found strong enough to survive. But the galaxy had changed around them. Humanity's secret was out, and the consequences would ripple through every alliance and treaty Earth had signed. The question wasn't whether humans could be trusted with power. The question was whether the galaxy could adapt to the reality that humanity's peaceful demeanor was a choice, not a weakness. And choices, as Vexara was learning, could always change. The royal transport descended through Earth's atmosphere 3 weeks after the attack. Vexara pressed against the viewport, her 4 eyes scanning the planet below with fascination and trepidation. She'd reviewed countless reports about Earth, but nothing prepared her for the visceral reality of approaching a world that had spawned a species like humanity. The continents were scarred with the evidence of past conflicts. Massive cities sprawled across landscapes that bore the marks of centuries of industrial expansion and environmental recovery. Oceans churned with weather patterns more violent than anything on our homeworld. Even from orbit, Earth looked aggressive, a planet that had forged its inhabitants through constant challenge. They landed at the North American Diplomatic Complex, a facility that straddled the line between welcoming embassy and military installation. Jake noted her tension as armed security personnel, all human, took positions around their shuttle. He explained that Earth took the safety of visiting dignitaries seriously, especially after the attack on her flagship. The guards were there to protect her, not intimidate. But Vexara couldn't shake the awareness that every single human she saw was potentially as dangerous as Jake had proven to be. The friendly faces of the diplomatic corps, the efficient movements of the security teams, the casual competence of the facility staff, all of it now carried an undertone of threat that she couldn't ignore. The Earth Alliance representative who greeted them was a woman named Lisa Martinez, a career diplomat with warm brown eyes and a disarming smile. She welcomed Vexara with perfect protocol and genuine enthusiasm. But Jake noticed something the Queen missed. Martinez moved with the controlled precision of someone with military training. She was probably armed under her formal jacket. Earth wasn't taking any chances with their most important alien visitor. The tour began with carefully curated locations, museums showcasing human achievement, cultural centers celebrating art and music, universities where alien and human students learned together. It was the face Earth wanted to show the galaxy, the peaceful civilization that had emerged from chaos. Vexara appreciated the effort but recognized it for what it was, a diplomatic performance. She stopped the tour at a historical military museum, much to Martinez's obvious discomfort. The diplomat tried to redirect them to more pleasant locations, but Vexara insisted. If she was going to understand humanity, she needed to see the truth, not just the carefully polished image. The museum was sobering. Displays chronicled thousands of years of human warfare, from primitive weapons to nuclear arsenals to the space-based defense systems that protected Earth today. Each exhibit came with casualty numbers that made Vexara's stomach turn. The total deaths from human conflicts numbered in the billions. Her entire species' population was smaller than humanity's war debt. Jake walked beside her, providing context that the sanitized plaques couldn't. He pointed out innovations that had emerged from military necessity. Medical advances born from treating battlefield injuries, communication technology developed for military coordination, material science driven by armor and weapons research. Humanity's capacity for destruction had paradoxically accelerated their capacity for creation. They stopped at an exhibit dedicated to the formation of the Earth Alliance, the political entity that had finally unified humanity after the devastating resource wars of the early 21st century. The displays showed ruins of cities, millions of refugees, and eventually, the moment when exhausted nations had chosen cooperation over continued conflict. Vexara read the central plaque aloud. It quoted the Alliance's founding principle that humanity's survival required channeling their aggressive instincts toward external challenges rather than internal conflicts. She turned to Jake and asked if that was true, if humans had simply redirected their violence toward space exploration instead of addressing the root cause. Jake considered the question carefully. He explained that it wasn't that simple. Aggression was part of human nature, yes, but so was cooperation, creativity, and compassion. The key was creating systems that rewarded positive traits while controlling destructive ones. The alliance wasn't perfect, but it had maintained global peace for over a century. That mattered. A commotion outside the museum interrupted their conversation. Through the windows, they could see a crowd gathering, human civilians drawn by news of the alien queen's visit. Security moved to intervene, but Vexara surprised everyone by walking directly toward the entrance. Martinez protested, citing security protocols, but the queen overruled her. She wanted to meet ordinary humans, not just diplomats and officials. The crowd parted as Vexara emerged. Hundreds of humans, young and old, pressed forward with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. She was struck by their diversity, the variety of skin tones, body types, and cultural markers that reflected Earth's complex history. No two humans looked exactly alike, unlike her species where regional variations were subtle. A child broke through the security cordon, a small girl clutching a handmade drawing of the Kethrian royal flagship. She offered it to Vexara with shy enthusiasm, explaining that she wanted to be a spaceship captain when she grew up. The queen accepted the gift, touched by the gesture, and asked the girl why she wanted to explore space. The child's answer was pure human optimism. She wanted to see new worlds, meet new species, discover things no one had found before. There was no mention of conquest or domination, just genuine wonder at the universe's possibilities. It was a reminder that humanity's capacity for violence existed alongside an equally powerful capacity for curiosity and hope. Other humans approached, asking questions about Kethrian culture, expressing condolences about the attack, thanking her for Earth's alliance with her empire. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Vexara found herself relaxing despite the earlier tension. These weren't warriors plotting expansion. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives, dreaming ordinary dreams about a better future. But then someone in the crowd shouted a question that cut through the pleasant atmosphere. A young man, his face intense, demanded to know if the Kethrian Empire would stand with Earth if other species tried to limit humanity's expansion. Would her people recognize Earth's right to claim territory and resources in space? Or would they join those who wanted to contain human ambition? The crowd went silent. Martinez stepped forward to deflect, but Vexara raised a hand to stop her. She addressed the young man directly, acknowledging that his question reflected real concerns. She explained that the Kethrian Empire supported all species' rights to peaceful expansion, but emphasized the word peaceful. The galaxy had room for everyone, if cooperation replaced competition. The young man pressed harder. He pointed out that many alien species had colonized their regions of space without interference, but humanity faced constant scrutiny and restrictions. The galactic community seemed more interested in limiting Earth than helping it thrive. Was that peace, or was it fear disguised as diplomacy? Vexara felt the weight of hundreds of human eyes on her, waiting for her answer. She realized this was the moment that would define her visit. She could retreat into diplomatic platitudes, or she could be honest about the challenge humanity faced. She chose honesty. She admitted that yes, many species feared humanity's potential. The attack on her flagship had only intensified those fears. Humans were capable of violence on a scale that most galactic citizens couldn't comprehend. But fear was not an excuse for injustice. The Kethrian Empire would judge humanity by their actions, not their potential. As long as Earth remained committed to peace, her people would remain committed to their alliance. She added that trust had to work both ways. If humanity wanted respect, they had to accept that their power came with responsibility. The galaxy was watching Earth closely, looking for signs of the aggressive expansion that had destroyed other promising civilizations. Every human action was magnified and analyzed. That might not be fair, but it was reality. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some nodded in understanding, appreciating her candor. Others looked skeptical, clearly unconvinced that alien species would ever truly accept humanity as equals. But the tension had broken, and the atmosphere shifted back toward cautious optimism. As security finally ushered them back toward the transport, Jake pulled Vexara aside. He thanked her for her honesty, admitting that most diplomats would have defaulted to meaningless reassurances. She had treated humans with respect by giving them truth, even uncomfortable truth, that mattered more than pleasant lies. That evening, they sat on the balcony of their temporary quarters, watching Earth's sun set over the Pacific Ocean. Vexira was quiet, processing everything she had experienced. Finally, she spoke, admitting that she understood now why humanity made other species nervous. It wasn't just the capacity for violence. It was the intensity with which humans approached everything. Their curiosity was as aggressive as their warfare. Their ambition was as unlimited as their creativity. Jake agreed, but pointed out that intensity could be channeled positively. Humans pushed boundaries because they refused to accept limitations. That drive had pulled them from primitive technology to starfaring civilization in just a few centuries. Yes, it made them dangerous. It also made them invaluable allies for anyone willing to look past the fear. Vexara leaned against him, her forearms wrapping around his body in a gesture of trust and affection. She declared that the galaxy would have to adapt to humanity's presence because restricting Earth was no longer an option. Humans were here to stay, and species like hers could either embrace that reality or waste energy fighting the inevitable. She made a decision then, one that would echo through galactic politics for generations. When they returned to her homeworld, she would propose a new treaty framework, one that gave humanity genuine equality rather than conditional tolerance. It would be controversial and probably face significant opposition. But watching her husband save her life had taught her something fundamental about human nature. Humanity's power wasn't something to fear or contain. It was something to respect and work with. The species that had clawed their way to the stars through sheer determination and sacrifice had earned their place in galactic civilization. And the Kethrian Empire would be the first to formally acknowledge that truth. The summit chamber of the Kethrian High Council resembled a cathedral carved from crystalline stone. 73 representatives from the Empire's most influential houses sat in concentric circles around the central platform where Vexara stood. Above them, holographic displays showed the faces of allied species leaders joining remotely. The greatest gathering of galactic power in a decade, all assembled to debate humanity's future. Jake watched from the diplomatic gallery, surrounded by Earth Alliance representatives who wore their anxiety like ill-fitting clothes. They knew this meeting would determine whether humanity's integration into galactic society continued or stalled. The attack on Vexar's flagship had exposed capabilities that terrified comfortable bureaucrats who preferred their allies predictable and manageable. Vexara began with a formal recitation of the attack, providing details that made several council members shift uncomfortably. She didn't soften the violence or downplay the threat. She wanted them to understand exactly what had happened before she revealed her conclusions. Then she pivoted to Jake's response, describing in clinical detail how a single human had neutralized a heavily armed assault team. The chamber erupted in agitated conversation. Representatives from species known for military prowess looked skeptical. Those from peaceful worlds looked frightened. Everyone had an opinion about what humanity's demonstrated capabilities meant for galactic security. Chancellor Zorath rose, his voice cutting through the chaos. He presented the military analysis that had been circulating through back channels for weeks. Projections showing Earth's potential military expansion, scenarios where human aggression destabilized entire sectors, recommendations for containment treaties that would limit human colonization and military development. The proposals were dressed in diplomatic language, but the intent was clear. Restrict humanity now, before they became too powerful to control. Several council members voiced support, citing examples from galactic history where militaristic species had caused catastrophic wars. Better to prevent conflict than fight it later. Vexara let them speak, allowing the fear and prejudice to fill the chamber. Then she activated the holographic display behind her, showing footage from her Earth visit. Humans going about their daily lives. Children playing in parks. Scientists collaborating with alien researchers. The ordinary face of a civilization that happened to possess extraordinary capabilities. She spoke about the child who had given her a drawing, about the young man who had challenged her with hard questions, about the millions of humans who simply wanted peaceful coexistence. She reminded the council that judging an entire species by their capacity for violence, rather than their choices, was the exact logic that had justified every genocide and persecution in galactic history. But she didn't stop with emotional appeals. Vexara was a politician, and she understood that fear required practical solutions, not just moral arguments. She proposed a framework that acknowledged humanity's power, while creating systems to ensure it served peace rather than conquest. The framework included Earth representation on the Galactic Security Council, something previously denied to younger spacefaring species. It provided humanity with legitimate channels to address grievances and compete for resources through established protocols. Most controversially, it required other species to reduce restrictions on human colonization and technology sharing. The logic was straightforward. Humanity's aggression had been forged by scarcity and competition. Give them room to grow, provide them with stakes in galactic stability, and their self-interest would align with peace. Continue treating them as potential enemies, and eventually they would become actual ones. A representative from the Vorgothi Collective, a species known for military strength, challenged the proposal. She argued that giving humans more power would only accelerate the timeline to conflict. Why reward a dangerous species with opportunities that would make them more dangerous? Vexara's response was blunt. Because humanity already had power, whether the Council acknowledged it or not. Earth possessed nuclear weapons, biological warfare capabilities, and an industrial base that could shift to military production faster than most species could mobilize defense. The choice wasn't between a weak humanity and a strong humanity. It was between a humanity that felt respected and included, or a humanity that felt threatened and isolated. She played her final card then, revealing information that made several council members gasp. During her visit to Earth, she had accessed classified files from the resource wars. The documentation showed how close humanity had come to self-extinction. Multiple nuclear powers had brought civilization to the brink, before finally choosing cooperation. That choice, made in humanity's darkest hour, defined who they were now. The species that had pulled back from apocalypse and rebuilt their world around peace principles deserved trust, not eternal suspicion. If the galactic community couldn't accept humanity after everything they had overcome, then perhaps the problem wasn't with humans. The debate raged for hours. Representatives proposed amendments, raised concerns, demanded guarantees that Jake knew Earth couldn't provide. No one could promise that humanity would never pose a threat. The best they could offer was evidence of good faith and mechanisms for accountability. Finally, the vote was called. The framework required a 2/3 majority to pass. Jake watched the holographic tally climb slowly, each light representing a species choosing hope over fear or pragmatism over prejudice. It was close. Far closer than anyone had anticipated. When the final count appeared, the framework had passed by exactly 3 votes. Earth's place in galactic civilization was secure, but the narrow margin revealed how fragile that security remained. Humanity's integration was tolerated more than embraced. accepted out of necessity more than genuine welcome. Jake felt conflicting emotions as the chamber erupted in reaction. Relief that Earth wouldn't face sanctions or containment. Frustration that humanity still had to prove themselves worthy of basic respect. Pride that his wife had fought so hard for a species that wasn't her own. And underneath it all, a nagging awareness that the galaxy's fears weren't entirely unjustified. The reception following the vote was tense. Representatives who had opposed the framework avoided the Earth delegation, while supporters offered congratulations that felt more like condolences. Everyone understood that this was a beginning, not a resolution. Humanity would spend decades, perhaps centuries, proving they deserved the opportunity Vexara had secured. Jake found his wife on a private balcony, staring at the binary stars that dominated the Kethrian sky. She looked exhausted, the weight of leadership evident in her posture. He approached quietly, giving her space to process everything that had happened. She spoke without turning, her voice carrying a mixture of triumph and worry. She had won the vote, yes, but the margin revealed deep divisions in the galactic community. Half the council remained skeptical of humanity at best, actively hostile at worst. Any mistake Earth made would be magnified. Any aggression would be seen as proof that the doubters were right all along. Jake acknowledged the challenge, but pointed out that humanity had faced worse odds. His species had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and environmental collapse. They had spread across a planet that actively tried to kill them, then launched themselves into space despite the monumental dangers. Galactic skepticism was just another obstacle to overcome. Vexara finally turned to face him, and he saw tears on her face, a rare display of emotion for someone trained in royal composure. She admitted that she was terrified of being wrong, of having gambled her empire's security on faith in humanity's better nature. If Earth betrayed that trust, the consequences would fall on her people as much as anyone. Jake had no easy reassurances to offer. He couldn't promise that every human would make good choices, that Earth's government would never pursue aggressive policies, that the violent heritage of his species wouldn't resurface under pressure. All he could promise was his own commitment to peace and the belief that most humans shared that commitment. They stood together as the stars wheeled overhead, two individuals from radically different species, bound by love and shared hope for a better future. The galaxy had changed because of them, though whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Inside the summit chamber, representatives continued debating implementation details that would shape humanity's integration for generations. Treaties were drafted, protocols established, monitoring systems designed. The machinery of galactic governance ground forward, transforming Vexara's vision into practical reality. But Jake understood something that many in that chamber didn't. The real test wouldn't come from legislation or treaties. It would come in moments of crisis, when humans had to choose between short-term advantage and long-term peace. When Earth faced threats or opportunities that tempted aggressive action. When the capacity for violence that had served humanity so well in their climb to the stars became a liability rather than an asset. His species had unleashed its true power during the attack on the flagship, demonstrating capabilities that would haunt galactic nightmares for years. Now came the harder part, proving that power could be wielded responsibly, that the species forged in fire could thrive in peace. Vexara leaned against him, seeking comfort in his presence. She whispered that whatever happened next, she didn't regret fighting for Earth. She loved him, and by extension, she loved his species, with all their flaws and potential. The galaxy would have to make room for humanity, because she refused to accept a future where her husband's people were treated as eternal outsiders. Jake held her close and looked up at the alien stars. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in space, a blue marble where 8 billion humans lived their lives unaware that their queen's alien wife had just secured their future. He hoped they would prove worthy of her faith, that humanity's story would be defined by the child with the drawing, rather than the capacity for violence that had shocked the galaxy. The summit concluded as dawn broke over the Kethrian capital. Representatives departed, carrying news that would reshape civilizations. Earth's integration was official now, codified in treaties, and backed by the Empire's considerable influence. Humanity had been given room to grow, opportunity to prove themselves, and a chance to become something more than their violent past suggested. Whether they would seize that chance or squander it remained to be seen. But for the first time since encountering alien life, humans wouldn't face that future alone. They had an ally who understood both their darkness and their light, who believed in their potential enough to stake everything on their success. The transport carrying Jake and Vexara back to the royal flagship lifted off, carrying them away from the summit and toward whatever challenges lay ahead. Below them, the Kethrian capital sprawled across the landscape, a civilization built on trade and wisdom rather than conquest. Above them, the stars beckoned, infinite and full of possibility. Humanity's true power had been unleashed, not just in combat, but in the fundamental question it forced the galaxy to answer. Could power and peace coexist, or were they forever incompatible? Could a species that had fought its way to the stars find purpose beyond fighting? The answer would be written across decades and light years, in choices made and paths taken, in the daily decisions of billions of humans learning to be citizens of a larger community. And through it all, an alien queen and her human spouse would stand together, symbols of hope that different species could not just coexist but genuinely understand one another. The royal flagship's engines engaged, carrying them toward home and toward a future no could predict. Behind them, the Kethrian capital continued its ancient rhythms, forever changed by the presence of humanity in galactic affairs. Ahead, the stars waited, indifferent to the dramas of mortal species, yet full of wonders still to be discovered. Jake looked at his wife, at the woman who had risked everything for his species, and felt gratitude mixed with determination. Humanity would prove worthy of her faith. Not through grand gestures or dramatic demonstrations, but through the quiet accumulation of good choices and peaceful actions. One day at a time. One crisis at a time, one opportunity at a time. The galaxy had been stunned by humanity's true power. Now it was time to stun them again by showing that power could serve something greater than itself. That the species born in violence could dedicate themselves to building rather than destroying. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time, humanity wouldn't walk it alone. They had an ally, a friend, a family member, who understood them completely and believed in them anyway. And sometimes, that belief was the most powerful force in the universe.